What if I told you that the most famous shipwreck in history wasn't supposed to sink, and that the warnings were there all along? On the night of April 14th, 1912, the RMS Titanic received multiple iceberg warnings. Yet, just a few hours later, more than 1,500 people would lose their lives in one of the deadliest maritime disasters ever recorded. But here's what most people don't know. Titanic wasn't just a story about an iceberg. It was a story of overconfidence, missed opportunities, not enough lifeboats, and a series of decisions that turned a minor collision into a global tragedy. When Titanic launched in 1911, it was the largest moving object ever built by humans. The ship stretched nearly 900 feet long, stood over 11 stories tall, and contained luxurious first-class accommodations unlike anything the world had ever seen. Passengers could enjoy a swimming pool, a gymnasium, electric elevators, fine dining restaurants, and luxurious private suites. Many people believed Titanic was practically unsinkable. For wealthy travelers, a voyage on Titanic wasn't just transportation, it was a status symbol. For poor immigrants traveling in third class, it represented hope and a new life in America. On April 10, 1912, more than 2,200 passengers and crew departed on what was supposed to be a routine voyage across the Atlantic. No one knew they had less than 5 days left. As Titanic sailed westward, other ships began reporting dangerous iceberg fields directly in its path. Wireless operators received warning after warning throughout April 14th. Some messages were delivered to the bridge, others weren't treated with urgency. The sea that night was unusually calm. That might sound like a good thing, but calm water actually made icebergs harder to spot. Normally, waves crash against the base of an iceberg, creating white foam visible from miles away. On this night, the ocean was almost perfectly still. The water looked like glass. Then, at 11:40 p.m., lookouts spotted something directly ahead, an iceberg. They rang the warning bell 3 times, the signal for danger. First Officer William Murdoch immediately ordered the ship to turn. The Titanic began steering away, but it was already too late. The iceberg scraped along the ship's starboard side. Many passengers barely felt anything. Some continued playing cards. Others stayed asleep in their cabins. A few even joked that the ship had simply run over a wave. What nobody could see was the damage happening below the waterline. The iceberg had opened several sections of Titanic's hull. The ship's designers had planned for up to 4 watertight compartments to flood. Instead, 6 compartments were breached. Shipbuilder Thomas Andrews inspected the damage and came to a devastating conclusion. The ship was doomed. Titanic had less than 3 hours left to live. Here's one of the most shocking facts of the entire disaster. Titanic carried lifeboats for only about half the people on board. Even worse, several lifeboats left only partially filled. One launched with fewer than half the passengers it could safely carry. Many people simply refused to believe the ship was actually sinking. Crew members struggled to convince passengers to leave the warmth and safety of the massive liner for small wooden boats in the darkness. Meanwhile, the bow of the ship sank lower and lower into the freezing Atlantic. As lifeboats disappeared into the night, hundreds of people remained on board. The ship's band continued playing music to help keep passengers calm. Shortly after 2 a.m., Titanic reached the point of no return. The stern began rising high into the air. Lights flickered, then went dark. Under enormous stress, the ship broke apart. The front section plunged toward the ocean floor. Minutes later, the rest of the ship followed. By 2:20 a.m. on April 15, 1912, Titanic was gone. Hundreds of people were left floating in near freezing water. The temperature was so cold that most victims survived only a short time. More than 1,500 people lost their lives. Only about 700 survived. But the disaster changed maritime history forever. New laws required enough lifeboats for everyone on board. Continuous radio watches became mandatory. Better iceberg monitoring systems were created, and perhaps the strangest fact of all, the wreck of Titanic wasn't discovered until 1985, 73 years after the ship disappeared beneath the Atlantic Ocean. Today, more than a century later, Titanic remains one of the most studied disasters in human history, not because it struck an iceberg, but because so many warnings came before it and were missed. And that's what transformed a voyage of dreams into one of the world's greatest tragedies.